When the Corsair launched, in the bug smashes videos associated with configuring the Corsair for Anti Xeno combat, I mentioned a new build, which was highly unconventional. I could not expect how much popularity it would gain and the meaningful and impact it would have on the community. And so before I turn to other things for the coming week, which means I won't be creating content on a regular basis for reasons I explained in a community post, while instead I'll be focusing on some large projects, including the colonization mega guide and ranks on the Anti Xeno initiative videos. I thought I'd make a quick video to talk about this build, which is rapidly becoming the easiest and most comfortable build in the world of Anti Xeno combat. Explain a little bit how it works and let you decide if it is for you and how you feel about it. The build is a Corsair build. And the reason it is so unconventional, it is because it mixes AX weapon types, which until now has been a big no-no as far as build theory is concerned. For a number of reasons, up to this point, up to the Corsair coming live, everything worked against mixing weapon types. It was generally not a good idea to mix Guardian weapons because they have different travel speed and shot delay, and they're just very hard to use together. It was generally a bad idea to mix and match human weapons and Guardian weapons because you were kind of using slots that would otherwise be reserved for more DPS in the form of Guardian weapons and fixed weapons if you were to use human weapons, which really are gimbal Anti Xeno multi-cannons and their enhanced pre-engineered version, the so-called Azimuth multi-cannons. The Corsair somewhat changes that equation because the Corsair is unique in that it is able to mount 2 or even 3, if you want, modified Guardian plasma chargers or modified Guardian shard cannons, while also kitting 3 enhanced Anti Xeno multi-cannons, gimbal, or their Azimuth variants, which are better, but only slightly better. You can totally get away with this build by using the unengineered version of these, which is available for credits only at Rescue Megaships. If you want to go all in, you can get these Azis, but these are materials expensive and candidly not worth it unless you spend a lot of time in the game. The Guardian plasma chargers, the modified Guardian plasma chargers, or modified Guardian shard cannons, they both work on this build. I like the plasma chargers on this build because I find they complement the multi-cannons better. The NPCs are the best exert weapons in the game. They're the best weapons to make Thargoid hearts become vulnerable. Versus the gimbaled Anti Xeno multi-cannons are among the best so-called sniping weapons, as in weapons that can actually destroy those hearts. And you can't really put more than 2 Guardian plasma charges, modified plasma charges, on a class 7 power distributor because these things are incredibly power distributor hungry. So you could put in a third and say drop the beam by adding a bigger experimental weapon stabilizer that would allow you to get a 6 experimental weapon. However, that would mean slightly higher alpha damage and a lot of issues with power distributor over time. So even though in the original build, actually, I think I recommended using 3 of those and 2 of these, I've come to change my mind on that. I actually think 3 large Azis and 2 large NPCs with a utility medium slot at the bottom is better. And we'll see this in action, and you'll tell me, and you should try yourself and tell me what you think. If you don't have access to pre-engineered weapons, which candidly are a hassle to get, you need a permit to a special system called Mbuni, you need a ton of materials to get these. The next best option for these 2 slots would be Guardian Gauss cannons, the standard workhorse weapon of the entire Anti Xeno campaign and Anti Xeno war. This build works still fine with Guardian Gauss as the exert weapons, not quite as well with the modified weapons, but modified weapons actually do make a substantial difference. So I like the Azi multi-cannons, which honestly doesn't matter if you have a pre-engineered ones. This is something that eventually you might want to go and deal with a grind to acquire these because the weapons are inherently really superior for this build versus Guardian Gauss cannons. The final slot, the medium slot at the bottom of the Corsair, is what I call kind of a utility slot. There's a fixed thermal vent beam laser here to help with keeping cool when not directly engaging, which is, I think, the default build for a ship that's meant to fight in Anti Xeno combat zones. If you were to fight solo, you might want to replace this with a flak cannon to deal with a swarm, which is added quality of life. The ability of having this much firepower and flak is one of the things that makes the Corsair an absolute beast in Anti Xeno combat, especially when fighting solo. I personally don't particularly care about flak, and again, for the purpose of this demonstration, I think flak is kind of beyond the purpose of this demonstration. I put a fixed beam here. Why did I not put a gimbal beam? The reason I didn't put a gimbal beam is because of the location of the slot on the ship. This slot is immediately underneath the ship. So this is a slot, this is a ship above it. Because you're generally orbiting down, so you're kind of pointing up while orbiting down, and the interceptor is above you here, if you put a gimbal beam underneath here, the gimbal beam basically can't actually lock an interceptor above it because your ship gets in the way. So the gimbal beam will not fire as kind of the ship blocks the gimbal from actually tracking something that is above you. And as a result, it kind of gets an annoying situation when you're trying to fire a gimbal beam. It's not firing, and wondering why, and you're like, oh, okay, my ship is in the way. But it's confusing. It's like one of the things that like generally kind of like you want to try to avoid. As a general rule, a gimbal beam for thermal venting purposes is better because thermal vent works by inverting the thermal load of a weapon and cooling you by as much as the weapon would normally heat you. So because the gimbal beam has a higher thermal load, it means that it cools you more. And if you're using weapons for cooling, more thermal load is better because it cools you more. So gimbal is better for cooling versus the fixed beam that does a little bit more damage. But because of the positioning and the fact that the kind of ship gets in the way, on this particular build, I prefer the fixed beam because it fires wherever it's firing. At least you know it's a fixed weapon. And you don't need to have an additional mental load of saying, is my ship in the way? Is that why my beam is not firing? Or what's going on? My distro is empty. Like one less thing to worry about. So fixed beam for that reason. In terms of utility mounts, again, this is a standard setup for an Anti Xeno combat build, which is incredibly comfy. This is a serious pre-engineered heatsink, but you can use a regular heatsink. It doesn't make a humongous difference. There's an enhanced Xeno scanner. Now, this is very important. This ship needs an enhanced Xeno scanner. You need to get a detailed scan of interceptors. Otherwise, you won't be able to sub-target interceptor hearts. And if you're not able to sub-target interceptor hearts, your guns will not track, your multi-cannons will not track the hearts. So you won't be able to actually shoot the hearts down. So this module is essential on this build. A caustic sink launcher is, again, quality of life and convenient for Anti Xeno combat zones. If you were fighting solo, you would drop this for another heatsink. Shutdown field neutralizer, again, is another important utility in an Anti Xeno combat zone where shutdown pulses come in all the time. If you're fighting solo, you would also drop this for another heatsink, and you will go with 3 heatsinks and an enhanced Xeno scanner. But otherwise, again, this is a standard Anti Xeno combat zone build for the Corsair. The build information, I'm not going to go through this in detail, otherwise it's going to be way too long, but you'll find it linked in the comments below. Is pretty standard. It has heavy-duty armor, which on the Corsair you can afford because of the massive thrusters and the fact that you are below minimum mass, regardless of how much armor and weight you put on this thing. Totally OP ship, again, if you ask me. Power plant is armored thermal spread. You will need it, the armored plant, to actually feed all the power grid necessities, which is not insubstantial, but this ship still has quite a bit of margin. So you could add another modified plasma charger if you wanted to, noting the problems with the distro, and it would still fit. So this is kind of convenient. Going to low emissions, complicated, possible if you wanted to truly min-max. I wouldn't do it. Knock yourself out if you want to do it. Thrusters are dirty drags, obviously. Frame shift drive doesn't really matter in combat, but it's the pre-engineered SEO. No, actually it's not. This is the one that comes with a ship that I engineered, but you can put the pre-engineered one if you want. Again, it doesn't matter for combat. Lightweight, live support, power distributor. Now this one is a bit of an interesting one. I have charging hands here. There is a school of thought that says with NPCs, with modified plasma chargers, there is a case to use weapon focused instead of charging hands. The plus side is you have significantly higher capacity of a weapon distributor with roughly the same recharge, which means that you can pre-charge and you have a bit more margin in using the very power-hungry power distributors in a series of quick multiple shots. You might be able to get an extra shot out of a weapon-focused power distributor. The downside of a weapon-focused power distributor is that it cripples your engine and system capacity and recharge rate. Now, the system's capacity doesn't matter that much on a non-shielded build. You still need some system capacity to fire heat sinks, but that's about it. But the engine capacity is an issue. Like, you want to be able to almost perma boost on the ship. It can't really quite perma boost, but it can get close. And crippling its engine recharge rate doesn't make it fly very well, in my experience, on a ship that really wants to boost. So personally, I would go charge enhanced. If you're willing to sacrifice the ability to boost on a regular basis for the ability to get off an extra shot, you can go weapon focused. Personally, I wouldn't, but this is a bit of a personal choice. Although I do think that, as a general rule, it skews heavy towards charge enhanced for the build. Sensors are long range. Again, weight is not an issue on the ship, so put the long range modification, which is kind of a default anyway. Fuel tank is what it is. When it comes to optional internals, cargo for limpets, class 6A FMU, which is an incredible luxury, which again now Power Grid affords us. One class 5D hull reinforcement package for hull, repairing the controller, otherwise the limpets don't do anything. And then 1, 2, and this should be another mod. Actually, I have a mod reinforcement packages there. So this is a little bit kind of messed up from me playing around with it, but we can fix it. So generally, you want 3 module reinforcement packages, and in this ship we have a class 4, a class 1, and a class 5, which is again very comfy, more than a typical combat build. Forget about the crate being able to kind of build anything like this. And then the question becomes, what do you want in terms of like how reinforcements and everything else? Like and then we need a class 3 for an experimental weapon stabilizer because we have 5 weapons, remember? 3 gimbal multi-cannons and 2 NPCs. That's why we need this experimental weapon stabilizer in slot 3. Now, the question is what we do with that class 2 slot. And if you look at the ship, this thing already has almost 3,000 hit points, almost 3,000 hull hit points. Now, you can make this a lot more tanky if you drop that class 6 AFMU and instead you put another hull reinforcement packages. And beginner players might actually want to do that. Like, if you are just starting out and if you're using this ship for comfort, which really is what this ship build is about, then you would replace this with class 5 hull reinforcement package like this one. And you would use this one for a class 2 FN. Let's use it this way. Like, for me, since I am totally comfortable with 3K hull, and I don't need more than 3,000 hull, I would instead replace this class 5 hull reinforcement packages, and I would put a second AFNU here. I would run this ship with 2 FNUs, because running multi-FNUs doubles your repair speed of modules, and that is incredibly comfy. Double repair speed with 3 module reinforcement packages and 3K hull and a ship that can go 600 meters per second and hit like a truck. I mean, you kind of get the gist. This ship is unbelievably OP. It is the best AX ship in the game. Now, granted, this configuration with these weapons is not the best Corsair. The best Corsair flies with 4 modified Guardian Shard cannons. This is the most comfy Corsair because it has gimbal weapons that track hearts for you, and it's also a lot of fun to fly. Not quite Cobra Mark 5 level fun to fly, but among the most fun medium ships to fly, if you ask me personally, and fun is very subjective, so again, your mileage may vary, but I find it to be incredibly fun to fly. It hits like a truck. Yes, it is not the best. Like, if you really meant business, you would put 4 mod shards in here, but it gets pretty freaking close, and the comfort this ship gives you is unlike anything else in the game. So, something to try. So, again, as I mentioned, I would go with 2 FMUs. However, if you are just starting out, you may want the additional buffer of an extra or an extra MRP, and that gives you 3.5k hull, which is, it's a lot on a ship this fast. It's a lot. So yeah, let's go with the 3.5k hull, and then you kind of like stock up on limpets, and then let's go and give you a live fire demonstration of how this ship works. You can fill up all the limpets. Again, the ship has all the weight capacity. It's not going to affect its performance an iota because you're still below the minimum thruster mass of a ship, right? Which is something that is not true for a crate. If you want to load down the crate with limpets, you're going to start slowing the ship down and making the ship turn slower and slower as it gets heavier. All right, let's make sure that we have everything configured. We have heat sinks, Anti Xeno scanners, repairs, daily scanners, caustic sinks, fuel neutralizers. Everything looks in order. The one thing we may want is to unmap the beam laser on this one so you can get a scan at the beginning of a fight without actively tagging an interceptor until we're ready. So let's do that. Let's go find something. Like, we're not going to do a whole Hydra fight because it's way too long. I'll have a time, but we can find a Basilisk or Medusa and do a Hard 2 just to give you kind of a demonstration. And we can do it with a bit more eye candy because like we have the ability to do so. So let's do so. All right, I think that's it. All right, now we got an elite that looks pretty. We got more than enough FPS. And let's go find, we are in a good system to hunt. Let's go find something to shoot. I'm using the FSS filter trick to only find interceptors and empty instants, as in to filter out scouts specifically. That's a Basilisk, but it's coming pretty far out. That's all right. Headquarters. Hello, headquarters. These are all Medusas, I mean. Well, I can go. Shall we go say hello to Medusa? It's a hideout, but it's also pretty far away. It's a Cyclops that would be completely obliterated by the ship and would lead to a very short fight. Let's see if we can. I thought there was a Medusa somewhere. Let's see if there is. Something like. Something about my graphics stuttering, though. I'm not sure why. Is this the reason? Or this should look good. Just drop this percent going to lower because, like, again, for some reason I am having some weird things. All right, sorted that out. All right, let's go find that signal source. Brett's out. All right, that should be a Medusa. Oh, by the way, the ship has super cruise overcharge, which stabilization, which the crate also doesn't have. Another thing that makes the ship so much better. But we ended up a little too early on the wrong side of a gravity well, so let's go and no super cruise overcharge does make things faster. Crossing big distances still does take a little bit of time. And then meanwhile, we switch to combat mode. we confirm that the panels are where we want them to be, which is always nice. I kind of position this on a heat sink so I can synthesize heat sinks quickly. If and when it's going to be needed, and it's going to be needed because we have a single heatsink launcher here. One thing I think you need to appreciate in Anti Xeno combat is heatsink ammo synthesis is dirt cheap. You should just spam those things and synthesize like there's no tomorrow because they're incredibly cheap and you're completely missing out if you're not doing that. This is not guaranteed to be a Medusa. There's like a 50% chance that it will be. And we got lucky. There it is. Hello, Medusa. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get that scan. As I mentioned, you need that Veto scan to be able to sub-target interceptor hearts. Alright, now we have the scan and we're ready to dance. So this ship can fly, I think 024 is the way it likes to fly. Charge a plasma charger. We're going to wait for our power series to reach our ship has now, and then we start. Note how I'm firing both weapons at the same time until I get to. I should have popped a heatsink way earlier here. Look at that heart going down. And I barely have to pay attention. And there you go. First heart down. We're taking some damage because we're not paying attention with my heatsinks. I thought I was kind of getting my bearing here. But again, this ship has repairs for ages and is incredibly fast. So let's get some repairs going there. Plasma charges are also incredibly effective against shields. Though the ship cannot perma boost, but it can get pretty close to a point where it kind of substantially, effectively, sort of behave like it was perma boosting. And give it a little bonk here. We lost our limpet as the swarm got a shot on us. We'll do one more height for the sake of demonstrating how it works. This time we'll remember to pop a heatsink. And it's going to rearm. It's doing its rearm maneuver. Just keeping it in range. Boosting around to avoid getting hit by the swarm, as I would lose my limpet if that happened. It's funny how interceptors now talk to you. See in the top left corner, it says unknown, I'm under attack. That's actually Fargo talking. Why that is happening is the subject of debate. My hunch is, after I was experimenting with large language models and having NPC actually speak using LLMs, and somehow that made it to production by mistake, but I don't know. But first I saw it was originally on the media test server. But evidently that made it to production by some mistake. Alright, shield is almost down. Okay, if we didn't have to repair and not kind of worry about getting shot at by the swarm, we probably could have also kind of gotten closer and fired NPCs at it while we're going at it, but we didn't. Alright, let's shield this down. Let's dance. Sub-target at the heart. Alright, I'm just not going to use my NPC now. I'm just going to use a multi-cannon just to show you how incredibly effective multi-cannons are taking down interceptor hearts. I'm kind of pretty far. Look at how fast that is going. As I get closer, those are going to start doing more and more and more damage. And that hard. And I'm like, those guns are kind of aiming themselves, right? These are not, again, they should have called a heatsink. I'm kind of really not making an effort, like, in terms of like, and there you go. Part 2 is down. So, again, this is a quick demo, and we'll chat on the implication of this, because I think we made our point. We don't need to necessarily finish this fight as we head back to Lenoa, somewhere in the system. Where's my car? There you go. Yes, it's faster to do it this way. I'm messing with filters at this point in time. So the implication of this is we now have an incredibly powerful build that is also incredibly comfortable to use. In fact, there are debates in the Anti Xeno community in that, is this ship too powerful, and is it making Anti Xeno combat too easy? And do we need to adapt our rules to discuss what is allowed and what is allowed in our ranks? Now, I'm on the side of this debate that new things and powerful things are good for the game. If anything, let's make harder challenges for those who want those harder challenges. But all in all, I actually appreciate and I like the fact that a ship like this can make Anti Xeno combat more accessible to more people, because candidly, it's a ton of fun. It's still pretty freaking hard. I might make it look easy, but believe me, there's a learning curve associated with taking down a Fargo Medusa or anything like that. Nevertheless, this is a new thing that really didn't exist before, as this concept of like having a build that allows you to mix and match weapon times, and it works really well, and it makes also Anti Xeno combat a lot more comfortable than it ever has been. I'm personally loving this build. If I mean serious business, I will still put 4 mod shards on this thing, but for anything that's like more casual fun and Anti Xeno combat zones and the like, I think this is the build to go. And based on its comfort level and the fact that it's just so much easier to use compared to anything else in the game, I think we're going to see more and more of these builds in Anti Xeno combat zones and at large in Anti Xeno combat more broadly. But what do you think? Is this something you enjoy? Do you have a Corsair? Like, did this make you buy a Corsair? Or are you holding out? Or you still love it with a crate over Chieftain? What's your view on this build and on the changes this introduces to the overall landscape of AX combat? Love to know in the comments below. And if you enjoy my content, please consider liking and subscribing, as it makes me notice your support. So thank you, and glory to mankind. Commander Mechan, over and out.